In the beginning, before there were screens, before books lined shelves, before even writing existed to record human thoughts, there was play. And within play, there emerged something extraordinary: the board game, a structured space where imagination, strategy, and chance could intermingle, where humans could compete and cooperate within agreed-upon rules, moving pieces across marked surfaces in patterns that somehow satisfied something deep in the human psyche. The board game is older than you might think, older than most civilizations, reaching back into the depths of prehistory when our ancestors first discovered that play could be formalized, that games could be more than spontaneous activity, they could be designed. The oldest known board game in the world was discovered in a burial site in Jordan, dating back nearly 7,000 years to around 5,000 BCE. Archaeologists found a collection of carved stones, some shaped like pyramids, others like barrels, alongside a rectangular stone board with carefully carved depressions. We don't know what this game was called or exactly how it was played, because its rules died with the people who created it. But someone loved this game enough to be buried with it, to carry it into the afterlife, suggesting that even in the Neolithic period, board games held significance beyond mere entertainment. They were valuable possessions, perhaps even sacred objects, important enough to accompany the dead on their final journey. Ancient Egypt gave us Senet, one of the first board games whose existence is thoroughly documented and whose boards have survived in remarkable numbers. Senet boards have been found in Egyptian tombs dating back to around 3100 BCE, making the game over 5,000 years old. The game was played on a grid of 30 squares, arranged in 3 rows of 10, with players moving pieces according to the throw of stick dice or knuckle bones. Beautiful Senet boards have been discovered in pharaohs' tombs, some made of precious materials like ebony and ivory, inlaid with gold. The most famous is perhaps the Senet board found in Tutankhamun's tomb, resting there for over 3,000 years, waiting to accompany the young king in the afterlife. Egyptians believed Senet had religious significance, that it represented the journey of the soul through the underworld, with each square representing a challenge or test the deceased would face. The game was both entertainment and spiritual metaphor, a way of playing out cosmic journeys on a simple wooden board. The royal game of yore, discovered in the 1920s in ancient Sumerian royal tombs in Iraq, dates to approximately 2600 BCE, making it nearly as old as Senet. What makes this game particularly remarkable is that we actually know how to play it. A clay tablet was discovered containing the game's rules, written in cuneiform script by an ancient Babylonian scribe around 177 BCE. Though the tablet was describing a game already ancient by that time, rules that had been passed down for over 2 millennia. The royal game of yore is a race game where players move pieces along a path according to the roll of pyramidal dice, trying to get all their pieces to the end before their opponent. Modern people who play reconstructed versions of the royal game of yore report that it's genuinely fun, with meaningful strategic choices despite its age. A game created 4,600 years ago can still entertain us today, a testament to the timelessness of well-designed play. These ancient games spread along trade routes, evolving and transforming as they moved from culture to culture. Archaeologists have found board games throughout the ancient world, in Mesopotamia, Persia, India, China, and even in the Americas, where games developed independently with no contact with old world traditions. Nearly every ancient civilization developed board games. suggesting that the impulse to create structured competitive play is fundamentally human, appearing wherever human societies reach sufficient complexity to have leisure time and the cognitive surplus to invest in creating games. Board games weren't invented once and spread. They were invented repeatedly by different cultures, taking different forms but serving similar social and psychological functions. In ancient Rome, a game called Ludus Latrunculorum, or Game of Mercenaries, was immensely popular among all classes of society. References to this game appear in Roman literature, with writers mentioning people playing it in public spaces, in baths, even during military campaigns. The game was a strategy game played on a checkered board, where players maneuvered pieces representing soldiers, trying to capture opponents' pieces by surrounding them. Though the exact rules have been lost, scholars have reconstructed plausible versions based on literary descriptions. Roman soldiers carried simple versions of the game carved into stone or scratched into wood, playing during lulls between battles, suggesting that board games served not just as entertainment, but as a way to maintain mental acuity, to practice strategic thinking, to pass long hours in camp or garrison. The game was so prevalent that boards for playing it have been found scratched into stone surfaces throughout the Roman Empire, on forum steps, in amphitheaters, even on the stone slabs of the Colosseum itself, where spectators or perhaps even guards whiled away time between events. The most significant ancient board game, in terms of its lasting influence and continued play, is undoubtedly chess. Chess originated in India during the Gupta Empire, sometime around the 6th century CE, though its exact date of invention remains debated. The earliest version was called Chaturanga, a Sanskrit word meaning 4 divisions, referring to the 4 types of military units represented in the game: infantry, cavalry, elephants, and chariots. These would eventually evolve into the modern chess pieces: pawns, knights, bishops, and rooks. From India, the game spread to Persia, where it became known as Shatranj, and from there it was carried by Islamic expansion throughout the Middle East and into Europe, arriving in Spain by the 10th century. Wherever chess traveled, it was embraced by the intellectual and aristocratic classes, who saw in its strategic complexity a worthy exercise for the mind. The game was seen as more than entertainment. It was a tool for developing military strategy, for practicing foresight and planning, for cultivating the kind of thinking required of leaders and commanders. What's remarkable about chess is how it evolved as it spread. The piece's movements changed gradually over centuries, with different regions playing by slightly different rules, until the modern rules were more or less standardized by the 15th century. The queen, for instance, was originally a much weaker piece, moving only 1 square diagonally. In medieval Europe, the queen became the most powerful piece on the board, able to move any number of squares in any direction. Some historians have suggested this reflected the increased political power of queens and noblewomen in medieval European society, though this theory remains controversial. What's certain is that chess has been continually refined over 1,500 years of play, with countless players across cultures contributing to its evolution, shaping it through play and experimentation into the perfectly balanced strategic system we know today. The Islamic world particularly embraced board games during the medieval period, with chess becoming so popular that Islamic scholars wrote extensive treatises analyzing strategies and famous games. These medieval chess manuals are among the earliest examples of game analysis, of treating games as worthy of serious intellectual study. Meanwhile, in East Asia, different game traditions flourished. Go, the ancient Chinese strategy game, emerged around 2,500 years ago and spread to Korea and Japan, where it was elevated to an art form. Go is played on a 19 by 19 grid with black and white stones, with rules far simpler than chess, but strategic depth that many consider even greater. The objective is to control territory on the board by surrounding it with your stones, creating a game where local battles and global strategy must be balanced simultaneously. Masters spend lifetimes studying Go, and even today, despite the game's ancient origins, new strategies and approaches continue to be discovered. As you rest now, breathing slowly and steadily, imagine those ancient players. The Egyptian noble moving pieces on a Senet board by oil lamplight, the Roman soldier scratching a game board into stone to pass the hours before battle, the Indian sage contemplating the pieces of Chaturanga, the medieval scholar hunched over a chess problem by candlelight. These games connected them across vast spans of time and space, created communities of players who shared common languages of strategy and play even when they shared no spoken language. The board game created a space outside ordinary time, a structured world with clear rules where outcomes depended on skill and thought and sometimes luck, where you could test yourself against others or even against yourself, seeking always to play better, to see deeper, to understand the patterns that led to victory or defeat. Let your breathing slow now, matching the patient, contemplative pace of an ancient game player studying the board, considering possibilities, imagining future moves. The games they played are games we still play, or games whose descendants we play, connecting us to humans separated from us by thousands of years. In the simple act of moving pieces on a board, we participate in traditions older than writing, older than cities, reaching back to our earliest ancestors who first discovered that play could be designed, that competition could be formalized, that joy could be found in the simple challenge of a well-made game. As we move through history, board games evolved alongside civilization itself, reflecting the values, concerns, and structures of the societies that played them. In medieval Europe, board games became markers of social status and refinement. The ability to play chess well was considered an essential accomplishment for nobility, alongside horseback riding, poetry, and music. Chess appeared in illuminated manuscripts, in tapestries, in courtly romances where noble knights and ladies played together. The game became so intertwined with aristocratic culture that learning chess was part of the education of young nobles, taught by tutors as seriously as Latin or logic. The checkered board became a symbol of civilization itself, of order imposed on chaos, of intellectual refinement, separating the educated classes from common folk. But common folk had their own games too. Tables, also known as backgammon, was played enthusiastically across all social classes in medieval Europe. The game had ancient roots. Variations of it were played in Mesopotamia thousands of years earlier, but it flourished particularly in the medieval period. Unlike chess, which rewarded pure strategic thinking, tables combined strategy with dice rolling, introducing an element of chance that made the game more accessible and created dramatic reversals of fortune. A skilled player could still win more often than not, but luck played enough of a role that anyone might triumph on a given day. The game was played in taverns and marketplaces, in castles and cottages, bringing together people across social boundaries in a way that chess, with its aristocratic associations, did not. The clicking of dice in cups and the clatter of pieces on wooden boards became the soundtrack of medieval social life. The Renaissance and Age of Exploration brought new games and transformed old ones. As European powers established trade routes and colonies around the world, games traveled with them, spreading Western games to Asia, Africa, and the Americas, while also bringing exotic games back to Europe. Travelers returned from Asia with descriptions of Go and other Eastern games that fascinated European intellectuals. This exchange of games paralleled the exchange of goods, ideas, and technologies that characterized the era. Games became objects of curiosity, souvenirs from distant lands, tangible connections to exotic cultures. A wealthy European merchant might own a chess set carved from Indian ivory, or a Go set brought back from Japan, displaying these as markers of worldliness and sophistication. The 18th century saw the emergence of modern commercial board game publishing. Previously, game boards were either made at home, carved by craftsmen as custom pieces, or improvised, scratched into tabletops or drawn temporarily on cloth or paper. But by the 1700s, printers and publishers began producing games commercially, printing decorated boards on paper that could be mounted on wood or canvas, creating colorful, elaborate game boards that combined entertainment with education. Many of these early commercial games were designed to teach geography, history, or moral lessons. One of the earliest was A Journey Through Europe, published in 1759, which used a map of Europe as the game board, with players racing from city to city, learning geography as they played. These educational games reflected Enlightenment values that prized knowledge and believed that learning could be made pleasurable through clever design. The Victorian era of the 19th century brought an explosion of board game publishing, particularly in Britain and America. The rise of industrial printing technology made elaborate color printing affordable, allowing publishers to create beautiful game boards with chromolithographed illustrations. The emerging middle class had disposable income and leisure time, creating a market for home entertainment. Board games became a staple of respectable family life, a wholesome alternative to cards, which some considered associated with gambling and moral corruption. Victorian parlors featured game tables where families and guests would gather for evening entertainment. Publishers released hundreds of different games, many reflecting Victorian preoccupations, games about empire and exploration, about commerce and industry, about moral improvement and Christian virtue. These games weren't just entertainment, but socialization tools, teaching children the values and behaviors their society prized. One of the most influential games of this era was The Mansion of Happiness, first published in America in 1843, though based on an earlier British game. This was a race game where players moved pieces along a spiral track toward a central goal, with spaces marked with virtues and vices. Landing on industry or truth might let you advance, while landing on idleness or deceit sent you backward. The game explicitly taught moral lessons, with the board itself serving as a map of proper Christian living. The Mansion of Happiness was immensely popular and spawned numerous imitators, establishing the basic structure of the American board game. A track-based race where players moved according to dice rolls or spinners, encountering good and bad fortune along the way. This simple, accessible format would dominate American board gaming for over a century. The transition from Victorian moral games to modern entertainment games is perhaps best exemplified by Monopoly, one of the most successful and influential board games ever created. But Monopoly's origins are more complex and controversial than most people realize. The game was based on The Landlord's Game, invented in 1903 by Elizabeth Magie, a progressive activist who intended the game to be an educational tool demonstrating the problems with monopolistic land ownership. Meigi created two versions. One where wealth accumulated to a single player who then crushed opponents, showing the evils of monopoly, and another with more equitable rules where all players benefited, showing an alternative economic model. The irony is profound. A game designed to critique capitalism became the ultimate celebration of it. The game spread through informal networks, with people making homemade versions and modifying the rules, until Charles Darrow encountered a version in the 1930s, during the Great Depression. Darrow created his own version, gave it a polished presentation with property names from Atlantic City, and sold it to Parker Brothers in 1935. Parker Brothers marketed it as Darrow's invention, and it became a phenomenal success, eventually selling over 275 million copies worldwide and being translated into dozens of languages. For decades, Meigi's original creation and her intentions were forgotten, buried under the commercial success of the Darrow version. Only in recent decades have historians uncovered the full story, revealing how a game designed to critique monopolistic capitalism was ironically monopolized itself, with its true inventor written out of history. Monopoly's success established the American style of mass-market board games, simple enough for children, engaging enough for adults, with enough luck that anyone might win, but enough strategy to make skill matter. The mid-20th century saw board games become big business. Companies like Parker Brothers, Milton Bradley, and Waddington's dominated the market, releasing classics that defined childhood for generations. In 1949, Clue, or Cluedo in the UK, was published, creating the murder mystery deduction game genre. Players moved through a mansion, gathering clues to determine which character committed murder, with which weapon, in which room. The game required logical deduction and note-taking, offering a more cerebral experience than dice-rolling race games. Clue became a cultural phenomenon, spawning a movie, numerous variants, and establishing itself as a permanent fixture in the board game canon. Its enduring appeal lies in how it made players feel like detectives, solving a puzzle through careful reasoning, turning every game into a little mystery story. The 1950s and 60s brought games that reflected the growing importance of television and celebrity culture. In 1956, the $64,000 Question game was released, based on the hit TV quiz show, beginning a trend of games licensed from television properties. These games often had simple mechanics, but succeeded through the appeal of their associated brands. The board game industry had discovered that licensed properties could drive sales, a strategy that would eventually lead to games based on every conceivable movie, TV show, and pop culture phenomenon. The game itself sometimes mattered less than the intellectual property it represented, marking a shift from games as self-contained experiences to games as extensions of broader entertainment franchises. During this golden age of American board games, the typical game followed a formula. A colorful board, simple dice-rolling mechanics, often a spinner instead of dice to avoid associations with gambling, and rules simple enough to teach in minutes. These games were designed for mass market appeal, for families with children, for parties and casual social gatherings. They were fun in the way amusement park rides are fun, exciting in the moment but not deeply engaging, driven more by chance than by meaningful decisions. Most games of this era could essentially play themselves. The outcome was largely determined by dice rolls, with players having minimal influence over results. This created games that were accessible and social, where the game provided structure for gathering and conversation, but where the gameplay itself was often secondary to the social interaction. Yet even as these light, luck-driven games dominated the American market, something very different was developing in Europe. German game designers were creating games with more strategic depth, less randomness, and more meaningful player decisions. These games, which would later be called German-style games or Euro games, represented a fundamentally different philosophy about what board games could be. But that development would come later, transforming board gaming in ways those mid-century American publishers could never have imagined. Rest now in the thought of all those game nights, all those families gathered around tables with colorful boards spread before them, dice clattering, pieces moving, children learning to take turns and accept losses, adults relaxing into play, everyone temporarily entering the structured world the game created. These simple entertainments were threads in the fabric of domestic life, creating memories and traditions, teaching social skills and strategic thinking in ways so gentle and enjoyable that the learning happened without anyone noticing. The games themselves might have been simple, but their role in human life was profound, creating spaces for connection, for friendly competition, for shared experience in an increasingly complex and fragmented world. Let your breathing deepen now, slow and steady like the patient turn-taking of a board game, each player waiting for their moment, the rhythm of play creating a kind of meditation. Feel yourself settling like a game piece finding its space on a board, coming to rest in exactly the right position, aligned and placed, ready for sleep's quiet game to begin. The transformation of board gaming that would reshape the entire industry began quietly in Germany in the 1950s and 60s, though its full impact wouldn't be felt until decades later. After World War II, German culture was deeply skeptical of games that glorified conflict or emphasized direct combat between players. This cultural context led German designers to create games with different themes and mechanics, games about building and trading rather than fighting and destroying, games where players could all succeed to different degrees rather than games with a single winner crushing defeated opponents. These early German games emphasized economic development, resource management, and indirect competition, creating a fundamentally different gaming experience from the American tradition of dice-rolling race games and luck-driven family entertainment. The game that truly launched the Eurogame revolution was The Settlers of Catan, designed by Klaus Teuber and published in Germany in 1995. Catan, as it's now simply called, combined accessible rules with surprising strategic depth. Players built settlements and cities on a modular board representing an island, gathering resources like wood, brick, wheat, and/or through dice rolls, then trading with other players to get what they needed. The genius of Catan was that even when it wasn't your turn, you remained engaged. Resources were generated based on dice rolls that affected everyone, and trading could happen at any moment. The game rewarded both long-term planning and tactical adaptation, required negotiation and social interaction, and while luck played a role, skilled players consistently outperformed novices. Catan became a sensation, first in Germany, then internationally, eventually selling over 32 million copies in dozens of languages. It demonstrated that board games could be engaging, strategic, social, and accessible all at once, appealing to adults who had outgrown childhood games but found traditional strategy games like chess too abstract or intimidating. Catan's success opened floodgates. Throughout the late 1990s and 2000s, German-style games proliferated, each exploring different mechanics and themes. Carcassonne, published in 2000, had players building a medieval landscape by placing tiles and claiming features with wooden followers. Ticket to Ride, from 2004, simplified the Eurogame formula into an elegant railway building game that could be taught in minutes but offered genuine strategic decisions. These games shared common characteristics. They typically lasted 60 to 90 minutes, avoided player elimination, everyone played until the end, minimized direct conflict, emphasized resource management and tactical positioning, and featured beautiful components and artwork. The production quality of these games was notably higher than typical American games. Thick cardboard, wooden pieces, stunning illustrations, treating games as premium products worth investing in rather than disposable entertainment. This European design sensibility gradually infiltrated the American market, creating what hobbyists call the board game renaissance of the 2000s and 2010s. Specialty game stores began opening, dedicated to these more sophisticated games rather than mass-market children's games and traditional classics. Online communities formed where enthusiasts discussed strategies, reviewed new releases, and shared their passion. Board Game Geek, a website launched in 2000, became the central hub for this growing community, eventually cataloging over 100,000 different board games and hosting millions of user ratings and reviews. What had been a niche hobby exploded into a thriving subculture, with annual conventions like Gen Con and Essen Spiel attracting tens of thousands of attendees, publishers releasing thousands of new games each year, and crowdfunding platforms like Kickstarter enabling small designers to fund production runs that previously would have been impossible. The diversity of modern board games is staggering, encompassing every conceivable theme and mechanical approach. Cooperative games, where all players work together against the game system, became a major genre. Pandemic, published in 2008, cast players as disease control specialists trying to prevent global outbreaks, requiring teamwork and coordinated planning. The game resonated particularly strongly during the COVID-19 pandemic, when its theme became uncomfortably relevant, demonstrating how games can mirror and process real-world anxieties. Legacy games introduced persistent consequences across multiple play sessions. Decisions in one game permanently altered the board or rules for future games, creating campaign-style experiences previously found only in role-playing games. Pandemic Legacy, Season 1, released in 2015, combined cooperative gameplay with legacy mechanics, creating an experience that many consider the pinnacle of modern board game design. A structured narrative unfolding over 12 to 24 games that could never be replayed exactly the same way. Party games also evolved dramatically. Cards Against Humanity, launched via Kickstarter in 2011, became a cultural phenomenon despite, or because of, its deliberately offensive humor. Players completed fill-in-the-blank statements using cards with outrageous phrases, creating combinations that ranged from clever to shocking. The game's success spawned countless imitators and variations, proving there was a massive market for games designed for adult social gatherings, games that facilitated laughter and social bonding rather than strategic competition. Codenames, published in 2015, offered a more family-friendly party game experience where teams gave and guessed one-word clues to identify secret agents, creating moments of telepathic connection when teammates understood obscure clues and hilarious confusion when they didn't. These modern party games demonstrated that simple mechanics could create memorable social experiences, that games didn't need complex rules or expensive components to be worthwhile. The rise of crowdfunding through platforms like Kickstarter fundamentally changed board game publishing. Previously, designers needed to convince established publishers to take a chance on their game, and publishers were naturally conservative, favoring designs similar to proven successes. Kickstarter allowed designers to pitch directly to potential players, proving market demand before production. Many of the most successful games of the 2010s were Kickstarter-funded, including Exploding Kittens, which raised nearly $9 million in 2015, becoming the most backed Kickstarter project at that time. Crowdfunding democratized game publishing, allowing innovative designs that might have been too risky for traditional publishers to find their audiences. It also created a new dynamic where players could back games years before receiving them, essentially pre-ordering based on prototypes and promises, creating both opportunities for innovation and risks of disappointment when delivered products didn't match expectations. The sophistication of modern hobby games reached levels that would have seemed impossible to earlier generations. Twilight Imperium, in its various editions, is a space opera strategy game that can take 8 to 12 hours to play, involving galactic conquest, political negotiation, economic management, and tactical combat across a modular map of star systems. Gloomhaven, published in 2017, is a campaign-style dungeon-crawling game with a box weighing 22 pounds, containing thousands of components and offering over 100 hours of gameplay across a branching narrative. These games represent board gaming as a serious hobby, demanding significant time and mental investment, appealing to players who want experiences as deep and engaging as video games, but with the tangible, social qualities that physical games provide. The complexity of these games would overwhelm casual players, but for their dedicated audiences, they offer unmatched depth and replayability. Interestingly, this explosion of complex hobby games coincided with continued success of very simple games. Uno, the color and number matching card game, created in 1971, continues to sell millions of copies annually. Jenga, the wooden block stacking game from 1983, remains a party staple. Classic games like chess, checkers, and backgammon still attract players worldwide. The board game market has stratified into distinct segments: mass-market family games sold in big-box stores, hobby games sold in specialty shops and online, party games for social gatherings, children's games, abstract strategy games, and countless niches serving specific tastes. There's no longer a single dominant type of board game, but rather an ecosystem of different gaming experiences coexisting and serving different audiences and purposes. This diversification reflects something profound about play itself. Different games satisfy different psychological needs and suit different social contexts. Sometimes we want light entertainment that requires little thought, just providing structure for socializing. Sometimes we want deep strategic challenges that engage our full mental faculties. Sometimes we want cooperative experiences that build bonds through shared challenges. Sometimes we want competitive outlets where we can test ourselves against others. Sometimes we want silly, laugh-inducing absurdity that breaks social inhibitions. The modern board game landscape offers all of this and more, recognizing that play is not a single activity, but a spectrum of experiences, each valuable in its own way. The technology that seemed poised to make board games obsolete, video games and digital entertainment, has instead existed alongside them, and increasingly, the two have merged. Many popular board games now have digital versions allowing online play or solo play against AI opponents. Tabletop simulator software lets players simulate any board game in a virtual space, moving pieces and rolling dice as if sitting at a physical table, but connecting with players worldwide. During the COVID-19 pandemic, when in-person gatherings became impossible, these digital implementations allowed gaming communities to continue, proving that what matters most about board games isn't necessarily the physical components, but the structured interaction, the decision-making, the shared experience of play. Yet for all these digital adaptations, physical board games have not just survived but thrived. There's something irreplaceable about sitting around a table with others, handling beautiful components, seeing the game state laid out before you in 3 dimensions, reading opponents' body language and expressions, engaging in the ritual of setup and teardown, experiencing play as an embodied, spatial, social activity. Board games offer what screens cannot: tangible presence, direct social connection, freedom from pixels and notifications, engagement that feels fundamentally different from digital interaction. In an increasingly virtual world, the physicality of board games becomes more valuable, not less. As you rest now, imagine the countless game tables around the world tonight, in homes and cafes and game stores, where people are gathering to play. Dice are rolling, cards are shuffling, pieces are moving across boards, players are laughing and strategizing and experiencing together the structured play that humans have created and refined across millennia. From ancient Senet boards in Egyptian tombs to modern Kickstarter sensations, the impulse remains constant: to create spaces of structured play, to challenge ourselves and each other within agreed-upon rules, to find joy in games that are, in the end, utterly meaningless except for the meaning we give them through our participation. Let your breathing slow like the patient pace of a long strategy game, each breath a turn, each moment a decision to simply rest, to simply be. The games can wait. Tomorrow there will be new games to play, new strategies to explore, new opponents to face, or new allies to cooperate with. But tonight, now, you need only this: the quiet, the stillness, the gentle descent into sleep's own game, where the rules are simple. Close your eyes, release your thoughts, and drift peacefully into dreams. As board games evolved into the 21st century, designers began exploring more experimental territory, pushing boundaries of what a game could be and what experiences it could create. One of the most significant developments was the rise of narrative-driven games that blurred the line between board game and storytelling medium. Tales of the Arabian Nights, first published in 1985 but republished in improved form in 2009, pioneered this approach with a massive book of story paragraphs that players would read aloud based on their choices and dice rolls, creating emergent narratives where the journey mattered more than winning. Players might become enchanted, imprisoned, wealthy, or cursed through their adventures, with victory points almost secondary to the stories generated. This represented a fundamentally different design philosophy: games as story engines rather than pure competition. This narrative focus expanded dramatically with games like Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective, where players investigated Victorian-era mysteries by reading newspaper clippings, interviewing suspects through a casebook, and following leads across a map of London. The game had no turns, No dice, no random elements, just pure deduction and investigation. Players worked cooperatively to solve cases, then compared their solutions to Sherlock's, usually discovering they'd missed crucial clues or made logical errors. The game treated players as intelligent adults capable of genuine mystery solving, offering an experience closer to reading an interactive novel than playing a traditional game. Its success demonstrated that board games could deliver experiences previously thought exclusive to books or video games, creating space for dozens of similar detective and puzzle-solving games. The intersection of board games and role-playing games created another rich design space. Descent: Journeys in the Dark, first published in 2005, offered dungeon-crawling adventures where players controlled fantasy heroes exploring dangerous locations, fighting monsters, and gathering treasure. Unlike traditional role-playing games that required a game master to improvise and narrate, Descent provided structured scenarios with specific objectives and rules for controlling monsters, making the experience more game-like while retaining the character progression and narrative arc of role-playing. This dungeon crawler genre exploded in popularity, with games like Gloomhaven refining the formula by making the dungeon itself run on autopilot through clever AI systems, creating a fully cooperative experience where even the monsters followed predetermined rules, requiring no game master. Educational board games experienced a renaissance too, moving far beyond the simple geography and arithmetic games of earlier eras. Photosynthesis, published in 2017, taught players about forest ecology through a beautiful abstract game where trees grew, competed for sunlight, and seeded new growth across seasons. The game mechanics directly modeled real ecological processes. Taller trees cast shadows that blocked sunlight from shorter ones, trees needed to spread seeds to ensure future growth, and strategic positioning determined success. Players learned about forest dynamics not through explicit instruction, but through playing a system that embodied those dynamics. Similarly, Wingspan, from 2019, became a massive hit while teaching players about bird species, habitats, and behaviors. Each bird card featured accurate illustrations and real facts about that species, with game abilities reflecting actual bird behaviors. Players built networks of birds in different habitats, each bird contributing to their ecosystem in mechanically distinct ways. The game demonstrated that educational content could integrate seamlessly with compelling gameplay, making learning an organic byproduct of enjoyable play. The aesthetic evolution of board games deserves recognition too. Modern games feature stunning artwork, with many publishers commissioning established illustrators and treating game boxes as art objects. Games like Azul, with its beautiful Moorish tile patterns and tactile resin components, or Sagrada, featuring translucent dice representing stained glass windows, elevate board games to objectively beautiful objects worthy of display. Publishers recognize that components matter, that wooden pieces feel better than plastic, that thick cardboard satisfies in ways thin cardboard doesn't, that evocative artwork enhances thematic immersion. The hobby embraced component quality as a value worth paying for, with premium editions featuring metal coins, custom dice, miniature figures, and other upgraded components. Some games come in boxes so beautiful and substantial they function as coffee table decoration, announcing the owner's sophistication and taste. Solo board gaming emerged as a significant market segment, challenging the assumption that board games require multiple players. Traditionally, Playing a board game alone seemed contradictory. Games were social activities by definition. But designers created games specifically for solo play, or added solo modes to multiplayer games. Some used AI opponents controlled by card decks or dice, creating challenging adversaries that followed sophisticated decision trees. Others presented puzzles or scenarios to overcome, turning the game itself into the opponent. Friday, published in 2011, was an early successful solo-only game where players helped Robinson Crusoe survive on an island, gradually improving his abilities while facing increasingly dangerous challenges. The COVID-19 pandemic accelerated solo gaming's popularity, as people isolated at home sought entertainment that didn't require gathering. Publishers began ensuring new games included solo modes, recognizing that players wanted the option to engage with games on their own terms and schedules. The psychological and therapeutic benefits of board games have received increasing recognition from researchers and clinicians. Studies have shown that regular board gameplay correlates with better cognitive function in older adults, potentially reducing dementia risk. The combination of social interaction, strategic thinking, and memory exercise provides exactly the kind of mental stimulation that promotes cognitive health. Board games have been used therapeutically to help children with autism develop social skills in structured, predictable environments where rules are clear and interactions follow patterns. Family therapists use games to facilitate communication and reveal family dynamics in safer, more playful contexts than direct conversation. The act of playing together creates bonds and shared experiences that strengthen relationships. Schools have begun incorporating board games into curricula, using games to teach mathematics, reading comprehension, historical concepts, and social-emotional skills. The game format makes learning feel like play, reducing anxiety and increasing engagement, while the competitive or cooperative elements motivate students to practice skills they might otherwise resist. The business of board gaming has become surprisingly substantial. The global board game market was valued at over $13 billion in 2019 and continues growing. Major publishers like Asmodee have been acquired by private equity firms for hundreds of millions of dollars. Professional board game reviewers on YouTube attract millions of views. Board game cafes, where customers pay by the hour to play from libraries of hundreds of games while eating and drinking, have become viable businesses in major cities worldwide. The success of crowdfunding has created a new class of independent publishers who can compete with established companies. Some individual board games have earned their designers millions of dollars in royalties. The stereotype of board games as dying relics of pre-digital entertainment has been thoroughly demolished. Board gaming is a thriving, growing industry with passionate communities and genuine cultural impact. Cultural representation in board games has also evolved significantly, though not without ongoing challenges. Historically, most board games featured Eurocentric themes, and when they depicted other cultures, they often relied on stereotypes or Orientalist exoticism. Modern publishers and designers have become more conscious of representation issues, consulting with cultural experts when depicting specific cultures, commissioning diverse artists, and telling stories from perspectives beyond the Western default. Games like Tokaido, depicting a journey through historic Japan with mechanics inspired by Japanese aesthetics, or Mombasa, exploring African commerce, but designed with input from historians about appropriate representation, show increased cultural awareness. Similarly, representation of gender, race, and other identities in game artwork and mechanisms has broadened, moving beyond the default of white male heroes. Independent designers from diverse backgrounds have brought their own perspectives, creating games that explore cultural experiences and histories often overlooked by mainstream publishers. This evolution mirrors broader cultural conversations about representation and inclusion, with the gaming community, often progressive and thoughtful, pushing publishers toward greater awareness and responsibility. The COVID-19 pandemic paradoxically both devastated and energized board gaming. Game stores closed, conventions were cancelled, and the fundamental activity of gathering around tables became impossible. Many smaller publishers struggled or failed. Yet simultaneously, board gaming experienced a surge of interest as people sought home entertainment during lockdowns. Families rediscovered classic games in their closets. Online board game platforms saw explosive growth as isolated players sought connection through virtual tabletops. Publishers innovated, creating print-and-play games downloadable from home, hosting online play events, and adapting to a temporarily virtual world. When restrictions eased, pent-up demand for in-person social experiences drove people back to game stores and cafes with renewed enthusiasm. The pandemic proved that board gaming wasn't merely surviving in the digital age, but fulfilling needs that digital entertainment couldn't satisfy: for tangible interaction, for face-to-face connection, for experiences grounded in physical presence and shared space. Perhaps most fundamentally, modern board games offer something increasingly scarce in contemporary life: structured, meaningful interaction with others that isn't mediated by screens. When you play a board game, you're fully present with the people around you, reading their expressions, hearing their laughter, experiencing their presence. Your phone sits forgotten as you engage with the game state, making decisions, planning strategies, negotiating alliances. The game creates a shared focus that facilitates connection without requiring the vulnerability of deep conversation. You learn about people through how they play, who's competitive or cooperative, who's cautious or bold, who remembers details or thinks creatively. Friendships form and strengthen through regular game nights, with the games themselves becoming less important than the ritual of gathering, the shared language of inside jokes about dramatic victories or crushing defeats, the accumulated history of games played together. Board games have always been about more than the games themselves. They're about time spent together, about challenges overcome, about stories created through play, about small moments of joy and frustration and triumph that stay in memory long after the final scores are forgotten. From ancient Egyptians preparing for the afterlife with their Senet boards to modern families gathering for weekly game nights, from Roman soldiers scratching game boards into stone to contemporary designers crafting experiences that blend art, mathematics, psychology, and play, the impulse remains constant. We create structured spaces for interaction, miniature worlds with clear rules and meaningful choices, places where we can test ourselves and connect with others, where outcomes matter just enough to create engagement, but not so much that losing is devastating. Let yourself settle now into this long history of play, this tradition stretching across millennia and cultures, connecting you to countless others who have moved pieces across boards, rolled dice, drawn cards, made choices within the structured worlds that games create. Feel the weight of this tradition holding you, supporting you, reminding you that play is not frivolous but fundamental, that games serve purposes deeper than they seem, that the simple act of playing together creates bonds and meanings that enrich human life in ways both obvious and subtle. Breathe deeply, slowly, letting each exhale carry you deeper into rest. The games are put away, pieces returned to boxes, boards folded, dice gathered. The table is clear, the lights are dimming, the day's play is complete. And now comes Sleep's own game, where you need make no choices, follow no rules, track no scores. Simply close your eyes and let yourself be moved, like a game piece in gentle hands, positioned perfectly for rest, placed exactly where you need to be, held safely through the night's quiet journey into dreams. As we approach the present day in our journey through board game history, we find ourselves in an era of unprecedented creativity and experimentation, where designers are exploring the very boundaries of what constitutes a game. One fascinating development has been the rise of what some call experience games. Games where the traditional goal of winning becomes secondary or even irrelevant compared to the experience of playing. The Quiet Year, published in 2013, is a map-drawing game where players collaboratively create a community surviving after civilization's collapse, adding locations and resources to a shared map while discussing challenges the community faces. There's no winner, no final score, just the map you've created together and the emergent story of this fictional community's year of rebuilding. The game asks players to invest emotionally in something they're building together rather than competing to outperform each other, creating an experience closer to collaborative storytelling than traditional gaming. Another boundary-pushing design emerged with escape room games, inspired by the live escape room experiences that became popular in the 2010s. Unlock and Exit. The game series brought escape room puzzles into board game format, with players solving interconnected riddles, decoding ciphers, and manipulating components to discover solutions within time limits. These games were often single-use experiences. Players might tear cards, write on components, or permanently alter materials as part of solving puzzles, making the game unplayable afterward. This disposability challenged the assumption that games should be replayable, treating them instead as consumable experiences like movie tickets or concert admissions. The puzzles were often ingeniously designed, using the physical properties of components in unexpected ways, overlaying transparent cards to reveal hidden images, folding paper to create three-dimensional objects, or using smartphone apps that interacted with physical components. These games demonstrated that board games could deliver the excitement and challenge of escape rooms in portable, affordable formats that brought puzzle-solving adventures into homes. The minimalist game design movement has also gained traction, with designers stripping games down to their essential elements, creating deep experiences from remarkably simple rules. The Mind, published in 2018, is perhaps the ultimate expression of this philosophy. Players collectively hold numbered cards and must play them to a central pile in ascending order, but they cannot communicate, cannot signal, cannot speak. They must develop intuitive timing, sensing when to play their cards through some emergent group telepathy. The game creates almost meditative focus as players concentrate on the shared task, and when it works, when players successfully coordinate through nothing but intuition and timing, it feels almost magical. The entire rulebook fits on a single page, yet the game creates genuine tension, excitement, and a profound sense of connection when players achieve synchronization. its game design at its most elegant, proving that compelling experiences need not be complex. Dexterity games have enjoyed a renaissance too, moving beyond simple children's games to create sophisticated experiences, testing physical skill alongside mental strategy. Crokinole, actually a 19th century game that's experienced modern revival, involves flicking wooden discs across a circular board, trying to land them in the center while knocking opponents' discs away. The simple flicking action conceals surprising depth. Expert players develop spin techniques, bank shots off edges, and precise control that takes years to master. Tournaments now offer substantial prizes for Crokinole championships, treating the game with the seriousness once reserved for chess or Go. Tokyo Highway, a more recent dexterity game, has players building miniature highway systems from sticks and pillars, carefully balancing pieces while trying not to collapse the increasingly precarious structure. These games engage different skills than traditional board games, testing hand-eye coordination and fine motor control, creating moments of breathless tension as players attempt delicate maneuvers that could topple everything. The integration of technology into board games has evolved beyond simple apps or digital versions into hybrid experiences that genuinely couldn't exist without both physical and digital elements. Mansions of Madness, 2nd edition, uses an app to run the game, controlling the narrative, determining what players discover in each room of the haunted mansion they're exploring, managing all the monster behaviors and creating atmospheric music and sound effects. The app removes the need for one player to serve as antagonist, allowing fully cooperative play while handling all the complexity that would otherwise require extensive bookkeeping. Chronicles of Crime takes this further, using a smartphone app with QR code scanning. Players scan character cards, location cards, and evidence cards to interview witnesses, search locations, and piece together mysteries. The app tracks all game state, reveals new information based on what players have discovered, and creates branching narratives that respond to player choices. These hybrid games demonstrate how technology can enhance rather than replace physical gaming, each medium contributing what it does best. Apps handling computation and randomization and creating dynamic content, physical components providing tactile satisfaction and social focus. Children's games have also experienced significant innovation, moving beyond simple roll and move mechanics to introduce genuine strategic thinking at age-appropriate complexity levels. My First Carcassonne simplifies the classic tile-laying game for children as young as 4, teaching pattern recognition and spatial reasoning. Outfoxed creates a cooperative deduction game where children work together to identify which fox stole the prized pot pie, introducing logical reasoning through accessible mechanics. These modern children's games respect young players' intelligence, offering meaningful choices and teaching game literacy. Understanding that different games have different goals, that rules can be learned and followed, that losing is acceptable, and winning requires both skill and luck. Game designers have recognized that childhood gaming experiences shape relationships with games throughout life, making thoughtful, well-designed children's games important, not just for entertainment, but for developing cognitive and social skills that will serve children in countless contexts. The rise of legacy games deserves deeper exploration, as they've transformed how we think about board games' temporal structure. Traditional games are pristine and repeatable. You can play chess or Monopoly infinite times, with each game beginning from the same starting position, entirely independent of previous games. Legacy games reject this, creating campaigns where each session's outcome affects future sessions. Risk Legacy, which launched the genre in 2011, had players placing permanent stickers on the board, tearing up rule cards, opening sealed compartments containing new components, and writing on the board itself. Cities founded in one game remained in future games. Players who won signed the board, earning permanent advantages. The game board became a palimpsest, a historical document recording the campaign's entire arc across 15 or so games. When the campaign ended, you had a unique, personalized version of Risk that could never be replicated. Your group's specific history was literally written onto the game itself. This legacy concept has been applied to numerous games since, creating campaign experiences across genres. Pandemic Legacy transformed the cooperative disease-fighting game into a year-long narrative arc where cities could be destroyed, characters could die, and the world's situation progressively deteriorated or improved based on players' success. Gloomhaven, while not strictly a legacy game, incorporated persistent character progression and world state changes across over 100 scenarios, creating a campaign that could span years of regular play. These games recognize that our most meaningful experiences often develop over time, that investment deepens through continued engagement, that transformation and permanence create emotional weight that ephemeral, resettable games cannot match. They also create strong incentives for consistent play groups, as the campaign requires the same players to continue the story they've begun together, strengthening social bonds through shared long-term projects. The explosion of small box games and microgames has democratized game design and accessibility. Games like Love Letter, which contains only 16 cards yet offers surprisingly strategic gameplay, prove that great experiences can come in tiny packages. These small games are affordable, portable, and quick to play, making them perfect for travel, for filling short time periods, or for introducing people to hobby gaming without overwhelming them with complex rules or expensive investments. Publishers like Button Shy Games specialize in wallet games, literally games that fit in a wallet, usually consisting of just 18 cards, yet offering complete, satisfying gaming experiences. This minimalism isn't just about economy. It's an aesthetic and design philosophy that values elegance and efficiency, that sees constraints as creative opportunities rather than limitations. Many designers now specifically pursue minimalist design challenges, asking how much game they can create from how few components, treating simplicity as a virtue rather than a compromise. The community aspect of modern board gaming cannot be overstated. Online forums, social media groups, YouTube channels, podcasts, and blogs have created a rich ecosystem where players discuss strategy, review new games, share custom variants, organize play groups, and celebrate their shared hobby. This community is generally welcoming and enthusiastic, eager to introduce newcomers to games they might enjoy, offering recommendations based on preferences and experience levels. Local game stores host regular game nights, providing public spaces where strangers can become friends through shared play. The community has developed its own vocabulary and conventions. Gateway games that introduce people to hobby gaming, filler games that occupy time between longer games, analysis paralysis for players who overthink decisions, alpha player problems in cooperative games where one dominant player tells others what to do. This shared language creates belonging, a sense of being part of something larger than individual play experiences. Board game design itself has become more accessible, with tools like the Game Crafter allowing anyone to professionally print small runs of their own game designs. Thousands of amateur designers tinker with game ideas, playtest with friends, refine mechanics, and sometimes see their designs published. Design communities share insights about game balance, playtesting methodologies, and publication paths. The barrier between consumer and creator has lowered dramatically. Someone who enjoys games can study design principles, create prototypes using simple materials, and potentially bring their vision to market through crowdfunding without needing backing from established publishers. This has democratized creativity, allowing diverse voices and novel ideas to reach audiences, though it's also led to market saturation, with thousands of new games competing for attention each year, making it increasingly difficult for any individual game to find its audience in the overwhelming flood of new releases. This brings us nearly to the present moment, to a board gaming landscape richer, more diverse, and more vibrant than at any point in history. Games exist for every taste, every group size, every time commitment, every level of complexity. Whether you want light party fun or deep strategic challenges, cooperative or competitive experiences, fantastical themes or historical simulations, narrative-driven stories or abstract puzzles, games exist to satisfy those desires. The ancient human impulse to create structured play has flourished in our era, producing thousands of ways to gather around tables and engage with rules, with each other, with the fundamental joy of play itself. As you rest now, consider the remarkable fact that games, these purposeless activities, these artificial challenges we create simply because they're satisfying, have persisted across all of human history and show no signs of fading. In every era, in every culture, humans have set aside productive labor to play together, to create meaning through meaningless competition, to find joy in challenges we've deliberately constructed to be just difficult enough to engage, but not so hard as to frustrate. Games are among the most purely human activities, serving no survival purpose, yet enriching life immeasurably, creating bonds and memories and moments of flow where we lose ourselves in the pleasure of structured activity. Let your breathing slow now, deep and regular, like the patient rhythm of a long game drawing toward its conclusion. The pieces have been moved, the decisions made, the experience completed. What remains is just the gentle satisfaction of time well spent, of play enjoyed, of connection made. The game table is cleared, the components stored away, the scores tallied and noted, and then released as unimportant compared to the experience itself. All that's left is rest, is settling into stillness, is allowing yourself to drift like a game piece returned to its box, nested perfectly among others, safe and complete, ready for the next time, but content to simply rest now, held in darkness, quiet, and peace. As we near the end of our journey through board game history, it's worth exploring some of the more specialized and unusual games that reveal just how broad and creative the medium has become. Abstract strategy games, which eschew theme entirely in favor of pure mechanical elegance, represent one of gaming's oldest and most refined traditions. While chess and Go are the most famous examples, modern designers continue creating new abstracts that explore mathematical relationships and spatial patterns. Hive, published in 2001, is played without a board at all. Players place hexagonal tiles representing insects, with each insect type moving according to specific rules, trying to surround the opponent's queen bee. The game creates an ever-shifting board from the pieces themselves, with the playing surface growing and contracting organically as tiles are added and moved. Ozul, from 2017, combines abstract tile laying with a Portuguese tilework theme, so beautiful that it won numerous awards for both gameplay and aesthetic design, proving that abstract mechanics and thematic presentation can complement each other elegantly. The concept of elegance in game design has become a valued ideal among designers and critics. An elegant game accomplishes much with little. Simple rules creating complex emergent situations, minimal components supporting deep strategic possibilities, clear mechanics generating surprising interactions. Go, with rules that can be taught in minutes, yet strategic depth that takes lifetimes to master, represents the pinnacle of elegant design. Modern designers pursue this ideal, attempting to create games where every component matters, every rule serves multiple purposes, and nothing feels superfluous or arbitrary. YINSH, part of the GIPF project of abstract games, achieves remarkable elegance with pieces that flip between colors when jumped, creating situations where manipulating your opponent's pieces becomes as important as managing your own. The pursuit of elegance isn't merely aesthetic, it's about respecting players' time and intelligence, creating experiences that reward engagement without burdening players with unnecessary complexity. Asymmetric games, where each player or faction operates under different rules with unique abilities, have become increasingly sophisticated and popular. Root, published in 2018, features woodland creatures battling for forest control, with each faction playing almost like a different game. The Marquise de Cat spreads military control. The Uri dynasties follow programmed commands that can spiral into chaos. The Woodland Alliance operates as insurgents gathering support, and the Vagabond wanders completing quests. Players must understand not just their own faction, but all others, predicting how different rule sets will interact. This creates rich, asymmetric gameplay where no two sessions feel similar, as different faction combinations create entirely different dynamics. The game demands that players think beyond their own optimal strategy to consider the ecosystem of competing strategies, understanding how their actions ripple through other players' game states. Asymmetric design allows games to explore power imbalances, different play styles, and complex interactive systems that symmetrical games cannot easily achieve. The notion of games as social commentary or political statements has emerged more explicitly in recent years. Freedom, The Underground Railroad, published in 2012, puts players in roles of abolitionists, helping enslaved people escape to freedom in the pre-Civil War American South. The game doesn't shy from its heavy theme, forcing players to make difficult decisions about resource allocation, risk assessment, and moral priorities, while educating them about this dark historical period. Spirit Island, from 2017, inverts the colonial narrative by casting players as spirits defending an island from colonizers, using powers representing natural disasters and native resistance to drive invaders away before they can establish settlements. The game explicitly critiques colonialism, rather than celebrating exploration and conquest as so many earlier games did. These games demonstrate that board games can engage seriously with difficult subjects, can make political and ethical statements, can educate while entertaining, challenging the notion that games should be escapist fun divorced from real-world concerns. Storytelling games and role-playing games have increasingly blurred into the board game space, creating hybrid experiences. Fiasco, published in 2009, is less a board game than a structured storytelling system, using tables of random elements to generate scenarios for improvisational storytelling inspired by Coen Brothers films. Ambitious people with poor impulse control creating disasters through their schemes and conflicts. The game provides structure without prescribing outcomes, facilitating collaborative narrative creation. Dialect, from 2018, has players create a language together as they tell the story of an isolated community, inventing words and concepts unique to their culture, then playing out the community's decline and the language's extinction, creating genuinely moving experiences about loss and culture. These games treat narrative as gameplay, with mechanics supporting story creation rather than story serving as decoration for mechanical systems. They recognize that humans are storytelling creatures who find meaning through narrative, and that games can scaffold and enhance our natural storytelling impulses. As we near the end of our journey through board game history, it's worth exploring some of the more specialized and unusual games that reveal just how broad and creative the medium has become. Abstract strategy games, which eschew theme entirely in favor of pure mechanical elegance, represent one of gaming's oldest and most refined traditions. While chess and Go are the most famous examples, modern designers continue creating new abstracts that explore mathematical relationships and spatial patterns. Hive, published in 2001, is played without a board at all. Players place hexagonal tiles representing insects, with each insect type moving according to specific rules, trying to surround the opponent's queen bee. The game creates an ever-shifting board from the pieces themselves, with the playing surface growing and contracting organically as tiles are added and moved. Ozul, from 2017, combines abstract tile laying with a Portuguese tilework theme, so beautiful that it won numerous awards for both gameplay and aesthetic design, proving that abstract mechanics and thematic presentation can complement each other elegantly. The concept of elegance in game design has become a valued ideal among designers and critics. An elegant game accomplishes much with little. Simple rules creating complex emergent situations, minimal components supporting deep strategic possibilities, clear mechanics generating surprising interactions. Go, with rules that can be taught in minutes, yet strategic depth that takes lifetimes to master, represents the pinnacle of elegant design. Modern designers pursue this ideal, attempting to create games where every component matters, every rule serves multiple purposes, and nothing feels superfluous or arbitrary. YINSH, part of the GIPF project of abstract games, achieves remarkable elegance with pieces that flip between colors when jumped, creating situations where manipulating your opponent's pieces becomes as important as managing your own. The pursuit of elegance isn't merely aesthetic, it's about respecting players' time and intelligence, creating experiences that reward engagement without burdening players with unnecessary complexity. Asymmetric games, where each player or faction operates under different rules with unique abilities, have become increasingly sophisticated and popular. Root, published in 2018, features woodland creatures battling for forest control, with each faction playing almost like a different game. The Marquise de Cat spreads military control. The Uri dynasties follow programmed commands that can spiral into chaos. The Woodland Alliance operates as insurgents gathering support, and the Vagabond wanders completing quests. Players must understand not just their own faction, but all others, predicting how different rule sets will interact. This creates rich, asymmetric gameplay, where no two sessions feel similar, as different faction combinations create entirely different dynamics. The game demands that players think beyond their own optimal strategy to consider the ecosystem of competing strategies, understanding how their actions ripple through other players' game states. Asymmetric design allows games to explore power imbalances, different play styles, and complex interactive systems that symmetrical games cannot easily achieve. The notion of games as social commentary or political statements has emerged more explicitly in recent years. Freedom, The Underground Railroad, published in 2012, puts players in roles of abolitionists, helping enslaved people escape to freedom in the pre-Civil War American South. The game doesn't shy from its heavy theme, forcing players to make difficult decisions about resource allocation, risk assessment, and moral priorities, while educating them about this dark historical period. Spirit Island, from 2017, inverts the colonial narrative by casting players as spirits defending an island from colonizers, using powers representing natural disasters and native resistance to drive invaders away before they can establish settlements. The game explicitly critiques colonialism rather than celebrating exploration and conquest as so many earlier games did. These games demonstrate that board games can engage seriously with difficult subjects, can make political and ethical statements, can educate while entertaining, challenging the notion that games should be escapist fun divorced from real-world concerns. Storytelling games and role-playing games have increasingly blurred into the board game space, creating hybrid experiences. Fiasco, published in 2009, is less a board game than a structured storytelling system, using tables of random elements to generate scenarios for improvisational storytelling inspired by Coen Brothers films. Ambitious people with poor impulse control creating disasters through their schemes and conflicts. The game provides structure without prescribing outcomes, facilitating collaborative narrative creation. Dialect, from 2018, has players create a language together as they tell the story of an isolated community, inventing words and concepts unique to their culture, then playing out the community's decline and the language's extinction, creating genuinely moving experiences about loss and culture. These games treat narrative as gameplay, with mechanics supporting story creation rather than story serving as decoration for mechanical systems. They recognize that humans are storytelling creatures who find meaning through narrative, and that games can scaffold and enhance our natural storytelling impulses. The relationship between board games and gambling deserves exploration, as it illuminates fundamental tensions in game design. Historically, dice and cards were associated with gambling, leading some religious and social movements to condemn games entirely or to prefer games without random elements. This tension still exists. Germany has strict regulations about games involving chance, which is why many German games use spinners instead of dice, technically avoiding gambling associations. Yet randomness serves important functions in games. It creates uncertainty and suspense. It gives less skilled players occasional victories against more skilled opponents. It forces players to adapt rather than execute predetermined plans, and it provides convenient resolution for complex situations. The key is balancing randomness with meaningful decision-making. Games that are purely random feel pointless, but games with no randomness can feel solved and deterministic. Modern designers carefully calibrate this balance, using randomness to create situations requiring decisions rather than determining outcomes directly, or using systems like deck building where players influence probability distributions through their choices. The psychology of winning and losing in games reveals interesting truths about human nature and game design philosophy. Traditional American games often create a single winner and multiple losers, with player elimination, meaning some players spend the game's end watching rather than playing. This creates negative experiences, particularly for children and casual players who may lose interest in gaming entirely if their experiences are predominantly losing and being eliminated early. Modern game design has moved away from these approaches. Most contemporary games keep all players engaged until the end, avoid creating runaway leader situations where one player's early advantage becomes insurmountable, and often create multiple paths to victory or different kinds of success. Some games deliberately hide scoring until the end, preventing players from knowing who's winning and thus maintaining suspense and hope for all players. Cooperative games sidestep winning and losing entirely, creating shared success or failure that doesn't divide the group into winners and losers. These design choices reflect evolving understanding of what makes games enjoyable, that the experience of playing matters more than the outcome, that games should create positive experiences for all participants, not just whoever happens to win. The phenomenon of gaming the system, or exploitative strategies, has led to interesting developments in game design. In any rule system, clever players may discover strategies that are technically legal, but violate the spirit of intended play. Moves that break the game's balance or create degenerate scenarios where optimal play becomes boring or repetitive. Traditional responses involved banning certain strategies or creating ever more complex rules to prevent exploitation. Modern designers take different approaches. Some embrace emergent strategies, treating unexpected player discoveries as features rather than bugs, trusting players to self-regulate if something proves unfun. Others design systems that are inherently self-balancing, where strategies that become too powerful automatically create their own counters, or where pursuing any single strategy too aggressively makes you vulnerable to others. Cosmic Encounter, designed in 1977 but continuously refined through numerous editions, deliberately creates wild imbalances through alien powers that break fundamental rules, trusting that the negotiation and alliance systems will prevent any single power from dominating. This philosophy treats imbalance as content rather than a problem, creating memorable moments rather than pristine competitive balance. The concept of gaming culture has evolved significantly, moving from stereotype-laden images of socially awkward basement dwellers to a more mainstream, diverse, and socially active community. Board gaming cafes have become hip social destinations, date night venues, and community gathering spaces. Major cities host multiple gaming conventions annually, drawing thousands of participants. Gaming is increasingly seen as a legitimate hobby alongside reading, film appreciation, or sports fandom. This cultural shift reflects both changes in gaming itself, more accessible, more diverse, more aesthetically sophisticated, and broader cultural changes, reducing stigma around adult play and nerd culture generally. The success of gaming content on platforms like YouTube and Twitch has made gaming visible and socially acceptable in ways it wasn't even a decade ago. Celebrity involvement, actors and comedians hosting gaming shows, appearing on gaming channels, or designing their own games, has further normalized and elevated gaming's cultural status. The future of board games seems both uncertain and exciting. Digital gaming continues advancing, offering experiences that board games cannot match in visual spectacle, computational complexity, or solo accessibility. Yet board games have not just survived, but thrived alongside digital competitors, suggesting they fulfill needs that screens cannot satisfy. The tactile pleasure of handling beautiful components, the face-to-face social interaction, the freedom from digital notifications and screen fatigue, the ritualistic aspects of setup and teardown. These create value beyond the gameplay itself. Some predict that board gaming will continue growing as people increasingly crave authentic, unmediated social experiences in an increasingly digital world. Others suggest board games will increasingly incorporate digital elements, creating hybrid experiences that leverage both medium strengths. Still others believe we're in a bubble that will eventually contract, though even contraction would likely leave the industry larger than it was before the Renaissance began. What seems certain is that board games will persist in some form, as they have for thousands of years. The fundamental appeal of structured play, of challenges engaged voluntarily, of social interaction guided by agreed rules, of competition and cooperation in contexts where stakes are simultaneously serious and trivial, speaks to something deeply human. We are playing creatures. We find joy in challenges, satisfaction in mastery, connection through shared activities. Board games formalize and refine these impulses, creating experiences that simultaneously matter deeply and don't matter at all, that engage our competitive instincts while keeping them within safe, friendly bounds, that create memories and stories and inside jokes that outlast the games themselves. The board game sitting on your shelf, whether a classic you've owned for decades or a recent acquisition from a crowdfunding campaign, connects you to this long history. When you open that box and begin setup, you're participating in a tradition that stretches back to ancient Egypt, to Roman soldiers scratching games into stone, to medieval nobles playing chess by candlelight, to Victorian families gathering in parlors, to modern designers crafting experiences with mathematical precision and artistic beauty. You're engaging in an activity that is simultaneously ancient and contemporary, that requires no justification beyond its own enjoyment, that creates value through the simple act of bringing people together to play. Rest now in the knowledge that games will continue, that somewhere tonight people are playing, rolling dice and moving pieces, and making decisions within structured worlds of rules and objectives. The games continue, endlessly varied yet fundamentally similar, serving the eternal human need for play. And you need play no games tonight. You need win no victories, overcome no challenges, follow no rules except sleep's simple imperative. Close your eyes, release your thoughts, and drift peacefully into dreams. Let your breathing deepen, each breath a settling, a letting go, a gentle descent into stillness. The game pieces rest in their boxes, the boards are folded and stored, the dice have stopped rolling. All is quiet, all is still. And you are exactly where you should be, ready for sleep's gentle game to begin, where there are no rules to learn, no strategies to master, no scores to track, only the simple, perfect experience of rest. As we approach the conclusion of our journey through board game history, we should explore some of the more philosophical dimensions of what games mean to us and why they've persisted across every human culture and era. Dutch historian Johan Huizinga, in his influential 1938 book, Homo Ludens, Man the Player, argued that play is not merely a human activity, but a fundamental aspect of culture itself, that civilization arises from and exists through play. Huizinga observed that play creates temporary worlds with their own rules, separate from ordinary life, yet deeply meaningful to participants. Games, as formalized play, create what he called the magic circle, a bounded space where normal rules are suspended and game rules take precedence, where actions have meaning defined by the game rather than real-world consequences. When you sit down to play chess, you enter this magic circle where moving pieces becomes profoundly important, where checkmate matters intensely, even though rationally you know it's just a game with no real stakes. This paradox, that games are simultaneously meaningless and meaningful, gets to something essential about human nature and our relationship with structured play. The concept of flow, developed by psychologist Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, helps explain why games can be so absorbing and satisfying. Flow is a mental state of complete immersion in an activity, where challenge and skill are perfectly balanced, where action and awareness merge, where self-consciousness disappears and time seems to distort. Games are particularly effective at inducing flow because they're explicitly designed to balance challenge and ability. Good games scale difficulty to match player skill, creating that sweet spot where you're neither bored by ease nor frustrated by impossibility. During a perfectly balanced game, players often report losing track of time, being completely absorbed in the immediate moment of decision-making and action, experiencing the pure pleasure of engaged consciousness. This flow state is intrinsically rewarding, making games valuable not for any external goal they accomplish, but for the quality of experience they create in the moment of play. We play games not to achieve something beyond the game, but because the state of playing is itself desirable, a form of optimal human experience. Games also serve as safe spaces for practicing skills and behaviors that have real-world applications. Children's games teach turn-taking, rule-following, winning and losing gracefully, strategic thinking, and social negotiation. All crucial life skills developed through play. More complex games continue this developmental function for adults. Strategy games develop planning and foresight. Negotiation games practice persuasion and coalition building. Deduction games hone logical reasoning, and cooperative games teach coordination and communication. The game context makes these learning experiences safe because failure carries no real consequences. Losing a game might sting emotionally, but it doesn't affect your career, relationships, or survival. This safety allows experimentation and risk-taking that would be dangerous in real contexts. You can try bold strategies, test your limits, fail dramatically, and learn from the experience without genuine harm. Games are laboratories for human behavior, spaces where we can practice being the people we want to become. The social bonding function of games has been recognized across cultures. Anthropologists have documented game playing in virtually every human society, often serving important social functions beyond entertainment. Games create structured interactions that allow strangers to connect, that give groups shared experiences and common language, that establish and reinforce social hierarchies through competition, or dissolve those hierarchies by creating spaces where status temporarily doesn't matter. In many traditional societies, games were associated with festivals and celebrations, marking important seasonal or social occasions. Modern board game nights serve similar functions, regular gatherings that maintain friendships, that create continuity and tradition, that provide predictable social connection in lives that may otherwise feel atomized and isolated. The game itself often matters less than the ritual of gathering, the familiar faces around the table, the accumulated history of previous game nights that become part of a group's shared identity and story. Games have also been recognized as art forms, not just entertainment products. The Museum of Modern Art in New York has collected video games in its permanent collection, recognizing game design as a legitimate artistic practice. Board games, while less frequently collected by art museums, demonstrate many artistic qualities. Aesthetic design in their visual presentation, mechanical elegance in their rule systems, narrative sophistication in their thematic integration, and the creation of meaningful experiences that evoke emotions and thoughts beyond the game itself. Some designers explicitly pursue artistic goals, using games to explore ideas, challenge conventions, or create beauty through mechanical systems. The question of whether games are art often focuses on authorial intent and aesthetic experience. Can games express ideas and emotions the way paintings or novels do? The answer seems increasingly to be yes, that games are a unique artistic medium combining visual design, system design, narrative design, and interactive experience into forms that can be as moving, thought-provoking, and aesthetically valuable as any traditional art form. The economic dimensions of game ownership and collecting have become increasingly significant. Some board game enthusiasts own hundreds or even thousands of games, far more than they could realistically play regularly. This collecting behavior parallels book collecting. The pleasure comes not just from reading, playing, but from owning, from building a curated collection that represents your tastes and interests, from the potential to play whenever the mood strikes. Board games, particularly limited editions or out-of-print games, can appreciate significantly in value, creating a secondary market where rare games sell for many times their original prices. Some games, like Kingdom Death, Monster, with its elaborate miniatures and premium components, retail for hundreds of dollars, targeting collectors willing to pay for exceptional quality and exclusivity. This transforms games from consumable entertainment into investment pieces, collectible objects that hold or appreciate in value. While some criticize this trend as losing sight of games' purpose, to be played, others see it as recognition of games as cultural artifacts worthy of preservation and collecting. The preservation of game history has become an increasing concern among enthusiasts and scholars. Unlike books or films, which have institutional libraries and archives, board games have had few systematic preservation efforts until recently. Many classic games have gone out of print and become difficult to obtain or research. Game boxes deteriorate, components are lost, and games disappear from cultural memory. Organizations like the Strong Museum of Play in Rochester, New York, maintain extensive game collections and archives, preserving physical games and documenting their history. Board Game Geek serves as an informal digital archive, with users documenting tens of thousands of games, uploading rulebooks, sharing reviews and history. Some publishers reprint classic games, making historically significant designs available to new generations. This preservation work ensures that game design knowledge isn't lost, that future designers can learn from historical innovations, and that games are recognized as cultural artifacts worthy of study and preservation alongside other cultural products. The internationalization of board gaming has accelerated in recent decades. While games have always crossed cultural boundaries, the internet has enabled unprecedented global exchange. A game designed in Germany can find audiences in Japan, Brazil, and South Africa within months of release. Designers from different countries bring different sensibilities and cultural perspectives, enriching the global game design conversation. Japanese games often emphasize minimalist aesthetics and elegant simplicity. Italian games frequently feature lush artwork and dramatic themes. American games tend toward longer playtimes and elaborate component production. These national styles aren't rigid categories, but tendencies that reflect different cultural values and design traditions. The cross-pollination of these traditions has created a truly global game culture where influences flow in all directions, where a designer from any country might draw inspiration from games and traditions from around the world, creating hybrid designs that transcend national categories. This global perspective has also raised awareness of how games can perpetuate or challenge cultural assumptions. The default Western medieval fantasy theme that dominated gaming for decades has been criticized as repetitive and culturally narrow. Publishers and designers have responded by exploring diverse settings and perspectives. Games set in Polynesian expansion across the Pacific, in African kingdoms, in Asian dynasties, in indigenous American cultures, in speculative futures where non-Western cultures lead technological development. This diversification enriches gaming by bringing fresh themes and perspectives, educating players about histories and cultures they might not otherwise encounter, and creating space for designers from diverse backgrounds to tell their own stories rather than only consuming Western narratives. It also raises complex questions about cultural appropriation versus appreciation, about who has the right to tell which stories, about how to represent cultures respectfully and accurately while still creating engaging games. These conversations are ongoing and sometimes contentious, but they reflect gaming's maturation as a medium grappling seriously with its cultural responsibilities. The question of what makes a game good has no simple answer, as different players value different qualities. Some prize strategic depth, wanting games that reward skillful play and offer meaningful decisions. Others value social interaction, preferring games that facilitate conversation and laughter over pure strategy. Some want immersive themes that create narrative experiences. Others prefer abstract purity without thematic dressing. Some want quick, light games that can be played casually. Others want epic experiences demanding hours of focused attention. The beauty of the modern gaming landscape is that all these preferences can be satisfied. Games exist across every dimension of complexity, theme, player interaction, length, and style. What matters most is matching games to contexts and audiences, understanding that the best game depends entirely on who's playing, why they're playing, and what they hope to experience. This diversity reflects gaming's evolution from a single dominant tradition, the American family game, light and luck-driven, to a rich ecosystem of traditions and styles coexisting and cross-pollinating. A given player might enjoy abstract strategy games when wanting pure mental challenge, cooperative games when seeking shared experiences with friends, party games when hosting large groups, and campaign games when committing to long-term play with consistent partners. Gaming literacy now means understanding this diversity, being able to recommend appropriate games for different contexts, recognizing that evangelizing one's personal favorites without regard for audience and situation is a recipe for negative experiences. The role of chance versus skill in games reflects deeper philosophical questions about determinism and free will, about how much control we have over outcomes in games and in life. Purely skill-based games like chess or Go can feel intimidating or punishing to less skilled players, creating stark ability hierarchies. Luck-driven games level the playing field, but can feel meaningless if outcomes are completely random. Most successful games balance these elements, using randomness to create situations requiring decisions, allowing skill to improve winning percentages without guaranteeing outcomes. This mirrors life itself. We don't control everything that happens to us, but we control how we respond, and skilled responses improve our odds even when we can't eliminate uncertainty. Games become miniature lessons in navigating a partially random world, where preparation and skill matter but don't guarantee success, where we must make the best decisions we can with imperfect information and uncertain outcomes. As you settle deeper into rest now, Consider the remarkable human capacity for creating meaning through arbitrary rules, for investing emotionally in outcomes that matter only because we've agreed they matter, for finding joy in challenges we've deliberately created to test ourselves. Games are fundamentally absurd when viewed from outside. People moving pieces of wood or cardboard according to arbitrary rules, treating these meaningless actions with seriousness and emotional investment. And yet this absurdity contains profound truth about human nature. We need challenges, we crave structure, we seek mastery, we desire social connection within safe boundaries. Games provide all this, wrapping fundamental human needs in rules and components, creating experiences that are simultaneously trivial and vital, meaningless and full of meaning. Let your breathing slow to the gentle rhythm of a game winding down, the final turns being played, the outcome becoming clear but not yet certain. The players fully present in these last moments before the game ends and the pieces are returned to their box. Feel yourself settling like those pieces, each finding its designated space, everything in order, the game complete and satisfying in its completeness. The board is cleared, the lid is closed, the game is stored away. And now there is only rest, only the soft darkness of closed eyes, only the gentle descent into sleep where no games are played, where no rules bind you, where you drift freely through landscapes that need no board, no pieces, no structure beyond the infinite possibility of dreams. As our journey through the history of board games draws to a close, we turn to some of the most intriguing contemporary developments and future possibilities that suggest where gaming might be headed. One fascinating trend is the rise of living games that evolve continuously through official expansions, community modifications, and tournament-developed strategies. Magic, the Gathering, while technically a collectible card game rather than a traditional board game, pioneered this model when it launched in 1993. Designer Richard Garfield created a game where players constructed custom decks from thousands of available cards, with new cards released in regular expansions that changed the game's strategic landscape. This created a game that never became solved or stale, that offered infinite variety through deck construction, and that built a competitive scene where professional players could earn substantial money. Magic has now been in continuous publication for over 30 years, with more than 20 billion cards printed, making it one of the most successful games in history and demonstrating that games can be living systems that grow and change rather than static, finished products. This living game model has influenced board game design, with many successful games now supported by regular expansions that add new content, mechanisms, and strategic possibilities. Wingspan, the bird-themed engine-building game, has released multiple expansions adding new bird species from different continents, each expansion subtly shifting the game's strategic balance and replay value. Terraforming Mars has expanded from its original vision to include dozens of expansions and variants, exploring different aspects of planetary development. These expansions keep games fresh for dedicated players, while allowing newcomers to start with the base game and add complexity gradually. This model benefits publishers economically. A successful base game generates revenue for years through expansion sales, but it also serves players by extending the lifespan of games they love, preventing the diminishing returns that come from playing any fixed system repeatedly. The concept of sandbox games, borrowed from video game design, has found expression in board games that provide tools and systems for players to create their own content and experiences. Shia, Legends of a Drift System, gives players a space trading and exploration game with modular tiles that create different galaxy configurations each time, mission cards that generate varied objectives, and enough flexibility that players can pursue entirely different strategies: trading, exploring, missions, or combat, with no single path to victory being clearly superior. This open-ended approach creates emergent narratives where players' chosen paths and unscripted interactions generate unique stories each session. Similarly, Tales of the Arabian Nights provides such a massive book of story paragraphs and branching choices that players rarely encounter the same events twice, making each playthrough feel like a unique adventure. These games prioritize experience and story over optimal play, treating the game as a framework for generating memorable moments rather than a puzzle to be solved. The accessibility movement in board gaming has gained significant momentum, addressing how games can be more inclusive for players with various disabilities. Colorblind-friendly design has become standard practice, with games using symbols alongside colors to ensure colorblind players can distinguish game elements. Publishers now create large print versions of card games for visually impaired players. Some games include tactile components or textured cards that can be distinguished by touch. 64 ounces. Games specializes in accessibility, creating games specifically designed for players with disabilities or adapting existing games with custom components. The community has also developed accessibility guidelines, encouraging designers to consider diverse player needs during development rather than retrofitting accessibility afterward. This movement recognizes that games should be available to everyone, that disability shouldn't exclude people from the joy and social connection that gaming provides, and that inclusive design often benefits all players, not just those with specific needs. The environmental impact of board game production has become an increasing concern as the industry has grown. Games require cardboard, plastic, wood, and other materials, packaged in boxes that include significant empty space for component organization. Shipping heavy boxes internationally creates substantial carbon footprints. Some publishers have begun addressing these concerns, using recycled materials, reducing plastic components in favor of wood or cardboard, implementing more efficient packaging, and calculating carbon offsets for production and shipping. Wingspan notably avoided plastic components entirely, using wooden eggs, cardboard tokens, and a wooden dice tower, setting an example that other publishers have followed. Some companies explore print-on-demand models that eliminate warehousing and unsold inventory waste. The community debates whether digital versions of games might be more environmentally responsible than physical production, though this raises questions about what's lost when games exist only as software rather than physical objects. These environmental considerations are beginning to influence purchasing decisions, with some players preferring games from companies demonstrating environmental responsibility. The relationship between board games and education continues evolving, with games being recognized as powerful teaching tools across subjects. History games like 1775, Rebellion, or Twilight Struggle make historical periods tangible and engaging, requiring players to grapple with the strategic and political realities that historical figures faced. Science games teach ecological principles, physics concepts, or medical knowledge through mechanics that embody those principles. Mathematics games develop numerical reasoning and probability understanding. Language games build vocabulary and linguistic skill. Teachers are incorporating games into curricula, using them to introduce topics, reinforce concepts, or provide engaging practice of skills that might otherwise feel tedious. Educational research increasingly shows that game-based learning can be highly effective, particularly for students who struggle with traditional instructional methods, because games provide immediate feedback, allow learning through failure in low-stakes environments, and engage motivation through challenge and achievement systems. The key is matching games to learning objectives and ensuring that playing the game actually requires using the knowledge or skills being taught, rather than game mechanics being superficially themed around educational content without genuine integration. The phenomenon of analysis paralysis, when players take excessively long turns analyzing all possible options, has led designers to implement various solutions. Some games use timers, forcing decisions within strict time limits. Others use simultaneous action selection, where all players choose their moves at once, eliminating downtime. Some games deliberately limit information or options, preventing the exhaustive analysis that leads to paralysis. Seven Wonders has players simultaneously select cards from hands passed around the table, creating a game for 7 players that completes in 30 minutes because everyone acts simultaneously. Captain Sonar takes this to an extreme, creating real-time team gameplay where both teams move and act simultaneously without turns, generating frantic, exciting gameplay but also potential chaos. These solutions recognize that waiting for slow players can frustrate other participants, that excessive analysis can destroy the pacing and energy that make games enjoyable, and that sometimes design constraints that force faster decision-making improve the overall experience, even if individual decisions become less optimized. The concept of quarterbacking in cooperative games, where one dominant player tells others what to do, has proven difficult to solve through design alone. Some games hide information, giving each player unique knowledge that only they can act on, forcing genuine collaboration rather than allowing one player to optimize everyone's moves. Hanabi has players holding cards facing away from themselves, able to see other players' hands but not their own, creating absolute information asymmetry that prevents any single player from having enough knowledge to quarterback. The mind eliminates discussion entirely, requiring intuitive synchronization rather than explicit planning. Other games embrace quarterbacking as acceptable, recognizing that some groups naturally gravitate toward collaborative decision-making and don't mind one person taking a leadership role. This reflects a broader recognition that social dynamics around games matter as much as mechanical design. A mechanically perfect game can create terrible experiences if it encourages negative social behaviors, while a mechanically flawed game might generate wonderful experiences if it facilitates positive social interaction. The rise of button-shy games and ultra-minimalist design has created an aesthetic movement celebrating constraint and elegance. These games prove that satisfying gaming experiences don't require elaborate production or expensive components. Games consisting of just 18 cards or a handful of components challenge designers to maximize depth and engagement within severe limitations. This minimalism appeals both practically. Tiny games are portable, affordable, and accessible, and aesthetically, demonstrating design mastery through economy of means. The movement parallels minimalist trends in other art forms, from haiku poetry to minimalist music, where constraint becomes a creative virtue rather than a limitation. These minimal games often travel well, can be played in cafes or parks or anywhere a small surface exists, and lower barriers to entry for new players who might be intimidated by complex games with hundreds of components and thick rulebooks. The future may bring even more radical innovations. Some designers experiment with app-integrated games where the physical and digital are so intertwined that neither could exist without the other, creating hybrid experiences that transcend both traditional board games and pure video games. Augmented reality technology might eventually allow game boards to come alive with animations and information visible through smartphones or AR glasses, combining physical pieces with digital enhancement. 3D printing might enable customized components, allowing players to design and print their own pieces, or enabling publishers to offer print files rather than physical products, reducing production costs and environmental impact while raising questions about manufacturing, copyright, and the value of physical objects. Some envision games becoming more personalized, with AI systems analyzing your play style and preferences to recommend games tailored specifically to you, or even generating custom game variants optimized for your particular group. Machine learning might create game-playing AI that provides challenging opponents for solo play or fills out player counts when you can't gather enough people. These technological possibilities are exciting, but also raise questions about what might be lost. Will algorithmic recommendations create echo chambers where people only encounter games similar to what they already like? Will AI opponents provide genuine satisfaction compared to human unpredictability and social interaction? Will digital integration enhance physical games or gradually replace them? What seems most likely is continued diversification and coexistence of different approaches. Some games will embrace cutting-edge technology, creating experiences impossible with purely physical components. Others will remain resolutely analog, celebrating the tactile, the unplugged, the face-to-face. Some will be minimalist designs playable with a handful of cards. Others will be elaborate productions with hundreds of components in boxes weighing 20 pounds. Some will be gateway games introducing newcomers to hobby gaming. Others will be complex systems demanding serious study and commitment. This diversity is gaming's strength. The recognition that different games serve different purposes, that no single approach is superior, that the question isn't which type of game is best, but rather which game suits this particular moment, this particular group of people, this particular purpose. The through line connecting all these developments, from ancient Senet boards to potential future innovations, is the fundamental human need for play, for structured challenges voluntarily undertaken, for social interaction guided by shared rules, for experiences that engage our minds and emotions within safe, bounded contexts. Games matter not because they accomplish anything external to themselves, but because the experience of playing is intrinsically valuable, because gathering around a table to engage in structured play creates bonds and memories and moments of flow that enrich human life in ways both obvious and subtle. As you rest now in this knowledge, feel the weight of this long tradition surrounding you, supporting you, connecting you to countless others across time and space who have found joy in moving pieces according to rules, in testing themselves against challenges and opponents, in playing together. The games span millennia, cross cultures, take infinite forms, yet serve the same eternal purpose, creating spaces for meaningful engagement, for connection through shared activity, for the simple pleasure of play. Let yourself sink deeper into stillness now, into the quiet that comes when all games have ended and all pieces are stored away. The board is cleared, the components are boxed, the rulebook is closed. What remains is simply rest, simply the gentle darkness behind closed eyelids, simply the rhythmic breathing that carries you deeper into sleep. You've played enough. You've challenged yourself enough. You've engaged enough. Now there is only this, the soft descent into dreams, the release of all rules and structures, the freedom of sleep where nothing is scored, nothing is won or lost, and you simply exist, peacefully, contentedly, held safely in the quiet night. Breathe deeply and let go. The games will wait for morning. The pieces will rest in their boxes until they're needed again. And you will drift into sleep's embrace, into that unmapped country beyond all gaming, where consciousness dissolves into dreams and rest renews everything for whatever games tomorrow might bring. Sleep now, deeply and peacefully, held in the long history of human play, connected to all who have found joy in games, but released from the need to play anything except sleep's own gentle game of letting go, of sinking down, of drifting peacefully away.